The gunshot echoed through the valley like a grim announcement. And Amelia Wright knew in that terrible moment that her life would never be the same. She clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her knuckles white against the black fabric as the minister's words drifted away on the Montana wind, unheard and meaningless in the face of her overwhelming grief. Her husband of just 3 years, Samuel Wright, now lay still in the pine box before her, his life cut short by a stray bullet during a bank robbery gone wrong in the dusty streets of Redemption Creek. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life that had brought them west from Boston now seemed like a cruel joke as the first shovelful of dirt hit the coffin with a hollow thud. Amelia fell to her knees, her body racked with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her soul. At 26, she was already a widow in a harsh land where women alone faced peril at every turn. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice breaking as tears carved wet paths down her dirt-stained cheeks. "How am I to go on without you?" The small gathering of townspeople stood in respectful silence, hats in hand, but already beginning to shift uncomfortably as her grief spilled raw and unrestrained. One by one, they began to drift away, murmuring condolences that fell on deaf ears as Amelia remained hunched beside the fresh grave, her slender fingers digging into the loose soil as though she might somehow reach through to him. The afternoon sun began its slow descent behind the jagged peaks of the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the small cemetery when Amelia felt a presence beside her. She hadn't heard footsteps approach, but suddenly there was the scent of leather and horses, tobacco and the open range. "Madam," came a deep voice, gentle despite its roughness. "The night air's getting cold. You shouldn't stay out here alone." Amelia didn't look up, couldn't bear to face another kind but pitying glance. "Please leave me be," she whispered, her throat raw from crying. Instead of departing, she felt something warm settle around her shoulders, a coat, heavy with the weight of trail dust and outdoor living. Only then did she raise her eyes to see who had offered this small kindness. He stood tall against the darkening sky, his form silhouetted by the setting sun. A cowboy, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work, his face weathered by wind and sun. But his eyes, they were startlingly kind beneath the brim of his worn hat. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, with a face that had seen its share of hardship but hadn't surrendered its humanity to it. "Zachary Granger, madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I rode with the posse that went after those outlaws who shot your husband." A flash of something anger, perhaps, or renewed grief passed across Amelia's face. "Did you catch them?" she asked, her voice suddenly hard. "Yes, madam, we did. They won't hurt anyone else now." Amelia nodded, accepting this small measure of justice, even as she knew it wouldn't fill the emptiness that now yawned inside her. Zachary Granger knelt beside her then, not too close, respecting her space in her moment of raw vulnerability. His hand, calloused and strong, reached out tentatively and came to rest over hers where it still clutched at the soil of Samuel's grave. "Mrs. Wright," he said softly, "I can't claim to know the depth of your loss, but I do know that no one should face such darkness alone." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in the sincerity in his gray-blue eyes, the compassionate set of his mouth beneath a neatly trimmed mustache. "I made a promise to your husband before he passed," Zachary continued, his voice low but steady. "He was still breathing when we found him. His last words were about you, madam. He asked that someone make sure you were taken care of." Fresh tears welled in Amelia's eyes. "You were there when he—" Zachary nodded solemnly. "I was. And I gave him my word that you would not grieve alone, that I would see to it that you had what you needed. You don't even know me, Mr. Granger. Amelia said, her voice barely audible. "No, madam, I don't," he agreed. "But a promise made to a dying man is sacred where I come from." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, Zachary Granger helped Amelia Wright to her feet. She stood unsteadily, leaning against him for support that was more than physical. "I can't leave him," she whispered, looking back at the grave. "You're not leaving him, Mrs. Wright," Zachary said gently. "You're just continuing on the path of living as he would want you to." With one arm supporting her, he led her slowly away from the gravesite, toward the waiting horses. Amelia didn't look back again, couldn't bear to see the mound of earth that now separated her from the man she had loved. But as they walked, Zachary's steady presence beside her felt like the first small ember of warmth in a winter that had settled deep in her bones. "I have a room at the boarding house," Amelia said, finding her voice as they reached the road. "Samuel and we hadn't built our own place yet. I know, madam, I'll see you safely there." The ride back to town was silent, with Amelia perched side-saddle on Zachary's horse while he walked alongside, leading the animal with a gentle hand. The streets of Redemption Creek were mostly empty at this hour, with only a few windows glowing with lamplight as they passed. At the doorstep of Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, Zachary helped Amelia down from the horse. She stood for a moment, uncertain, clutching his coat around her shoulders like armor against a world suddenly turned hostile. "Thank you, Mr. Granger," she said formally, beginning to remove his coat. "Keep it for now," he said, stopping her with a gentle touch to her arm. "The night's cold." Their eyes met briefly in the dim light spilling from the boarding house windows, and something passed between them, not romance, nothing so inappropriate in this moment of grief, but a connection nonetheless. An understanding. "I'll be around, Mrs. Wright," Zachary said, stepping back respectfully. "If you need anything at all." Amelia nodded, unable to form words around the lump in her throat. She turned and entered the boarding house, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back until the door closed behind her. In her small room, she finally allowed herself to collapse onto the narrow bed, still wrapped in the unfamiliar warmth of Zachary Granger's coat. The scent of him, horses and leather, tobacco and open skies surrounded her, and for the first time since the terrible news had reached her 3 days ago, Amelia slept without dreaming of Samuel's dying moments. The dawn brought no relief from grief, but it did bring clarity. Amelia rose from bed, her body aching from yesterday's emotional collapse at the cemetery, and faced the mirror on her washstand. The woman who stared back at her was a stranger, pale and hollow-eyed, with a wildness about her that spoke of desperation barely contained. "What now?" she whispered to her reflection, receiving no answer but the distant sounds of the town beginning to stir. The logical part of her mind knew what should happen. She should sell what few possessions she and Samuel had accumulated, purchase a ticket back east, and return to her family in Boston. They would take her in, of course, these parents who had opposed her marriage to a man with Western ambitions. They would cluck and fuss and say they had warned her, and eventually they would find her another husband safer, more suitable, less prone to dreams. The thought made her stomach turn. Samuel had loved this wild country, had seen possibilities in its untamed landscape that matched the vastness of his own hopes. To leave now felt like betraying him a second time, the first betrayal being her inability to save him from the bullet that took his life. A knock at her door interrupted these grim thoughts. Hastily wrapping a shawl around her shoulders to cover her nightdress, Amelia cracked open the door to find Mrs. Holloway, the boarding house proprietress, standing there with a tray. "Brought you some breakfast, dear," the older woman said, her eyes soft with sympathy. "You need to keep your strength up." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, but I'm not hungry," Amelia began, only to be cut off by the landlady's firm tone. "Nonsense. Grieve doesn't excuse you from eating. Besides," she added, lowering her voice confidentially, "that cowboy is downstairs asking after you. Zachary Granger says he made a promise to your Samuel." Amelia's hand went reflexively to her hair, which she suddenly realized was loose and uncombed. "Mr. Granger is here. Now." Mrs. Holloway nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes. "Seems a decent sort. Respectful. Said he'd wait as long as necessary, but wanted to make sure you were faring all right this morning. Please tell him," Amelia hesitated, uncertain what message to send. "Tell him I'll be down shortly." After Mrs. Holloway departed, Amelia moved with newfound purpose, washing her face in the cold water from the pitcher, dressing in her black mourning dress, and pinning her hair into a simple but tidy arrangement. She ate a few bites of the breakfast Mrs. Holloway had brought, finding to her surprise that hunger still existed even in the midst of grief. When she descended the narrow staircase 20 minutes later, she found Zachary Granger standing awkwardly in the small parlor, hat in hand, his tall frame seeming too large for the dainty furnishings that surrounded him. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and something in his expression relief perhaps made her heart constrict in an unexpected way. "Mrs. Wright," he said, inclining his head respectfully, "I hope I'm not intruding on your mourning." "Not at all, Mr. Granger," Amelia replied, her voice steadier than she had expected. "I wanted to return your coat and thank you for your kindness yesterday." She held out the folded garment, which he accepted with a nod. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid and uncertainties about the propriety of their continued interaction. "I've been thinking," Zachary said finally, his hat turning slowly in his hands, "about that promise I made to your husband." Amelia steeled herself. "Mr. Granger, while I appreciate your concern, you needn't feel bound by words spoken in a moment of extremity. I'm sure Samuel would understand if—" "Mrs. Wright," he interrupted gently, "I don't make promises lightly, and I don't break them at all if I can help it. Your husband saved my life once, did you know that?" Amelia blinked in surprise. "No, he never mentioned. It was about a year ago, before you both settled here. I got caught in a flash flood while moving cattle up near the Snake River. Your husband pulled me out when the current had me pinned against some fallen timber. Never asked for anything in return, just said he'd expect the same from me if the situation were reversed." The revelation settled over Amelia like a new layer of grief, another facet of Samuel she would never fully know. "That sounds like him," she said softly. "He never boasted about such things." Zachary nodded, a flicker of shared understanding passing between them. "So you see, Mrs. Wright, this isn't just about a deathbed promise. I owe Samuel Wright my life, and if helping his widow is the only way left to repay that debt, then that's what I aim to do." There was such earnestness in his expression that Amelia found herself momentarily speechless. When she did find her voice, it came out harsher than she intended. "And what form does this help take, Mr. Granger? What exactly are you proposing?" If he was offended by her tone, he didn't show it. "Nothing improper, madam, I assure you. For now, I thought I might help you sort through whatever needs sorting: property matters, finances, that sort of thing. Samuel mentioned you had a small plot of land outside town." "Yes," Amelia confirmed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. 10 acres with a partially built cabin. Samuel was working on it between his jobs at the livery stable. If you're planning to sell and return east, I know some folks who might be interested in buying," Zachary offered. "Or if you're thinking of staying." He left the sentence unfinished, watching her face carefully. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. Amelia hadn't fully decided her course, but something in her rebelled at the idea of simply retreating from the life she and Samuel had dreamed of building together. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I'd appreciate your guidance either way, Mr. Granger." Relief visibly washed over his features. "Then let's start with the practical matters, Mrs. Wright. Have you had breakfast? I thought perhaps we could ride out to your property today, assess what's there and what needs doing." The idea of returning to the half-built cabin that had represented so much hope was painful, but Amelia recognized the necessity of it. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "I think that would be wise." And so, an hour later, Amelia found herself riding beside Zachary Granger along the dusty trail that led out of Redemption Creek toward the foothills where Samuel had staked their claim. She wore her plainest dress, having changed out of the mourning black that would be impractical for such an expedition, and rode astride rather than side saddle on a gentle mare borrowed from the livery stable. The day was clear and bright, the kind of early autumn day that Samuel had loved, with golden light spilling across the landscape and the distant mountains sharp against the blue sky. The beauty of it all felt like a personal affront to Amelia's grief, a reminder that the world continued unabated despite the hole torn in her life. "Samuel chose well," Zachary commented as they crested a small rise and the property came into view. "Good water access, sheltered from the north wind, but with a clear view of anyone approaching." Amelia nodded, her throat tight as she took in the familiar scene. The cabin stood as Samuel had left it, walls raised, roof partially finished, windows still just empty frames waiting for glass. A small stable was more complete, housing the 2 horses Samuel had been so proud of acquiring. A creek gurgled cheerfully at the edge of the property, and beyond it, the land rose gently toward pine-covered hills. "He had such plans," she said softly, almost to herself. "A garden here, fruit trees there. Someday, when we had children, he was going to build a swing from that big oak tree." Zachary remained silent, giving her the space to remember, to grieve, to take in the sight of dreams interrupted. When they reached the cabin, he dismounted first and then helped her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist, releasing her the instant her feet touched the ground. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing toward the cabin door. Amelia took a deep breath and nodded, stepping forward to face whatever lay within. The interior was sparse but neat. Samuel had always been methodical in his work. A simple table and 2 chairs, a bed frame waiting for a mattress, shelves built into one wall. Tools were arranged carefully against another wall, and a small stone fireplace dominated the far end of the single room. "He did good work," Zachary observed, running a hand appreciatively over the smooth planks of the table. "Solid craftsmanship." "Samuel apprenticed with a cabinet maker before we came west," Amelia explained, moving around the small space, touching things as if to reassure herself they were real. "He always said his father would have preferred he stay in that trade rather than chase dreams of ranching in Montana territory." "Why didn't he?" The question was simple, but it made Amelia pause, turning to look at Zachary with newfound appreciation for his interest. "He said he couldn't bear the thought of spending his life in a workshop when there was so much world to see, so much land to work with his own hands under an open sky." Something flashed in Zachary's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or shared sentiment. "A man after my own heart," he said quietly. They spent the next few hours taking inventory of the property, the tools, the partially completed structures, the few pieces of furniture, the 2 horses in the stable. Zachary made notes in a small leather-bound book he carried, occasionally asking questions about what Samuel had paid for various items or what agreements he had made with local merchants for materials yet to be delivered. By midday, they had a clearer picture of Amelia's situation. The land was fully paid for, a fact that surprised her. Samuel had apparently made the final payment just 2 weeks before his death, using money he'd saved from extra work at the livery. There were some small debts in town, but nothing insurmountable. If she sold everything, she would have enough for a ticket back east and a modest sum to restart her life there. If she stayed, well, that was a more complicated calculation, one that involved not just finances but courage and determination. They ate a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples that Zachary had thoughtfully packed, sitting in the shade of the oak tree that would never now support a child's swing. The silence between them had grown more comfortable as the day progressed, but Amelia still felt the need to fill it with words. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Granger," she said, watching him cut a slice of apple with his pocket knife. "You know so much about my circumstances, but I know almost nothing of yours." Zachary looked up, seeming momentarily startled by the personal inquiry. "Not much to tell, Mrs. Wright. I've been riding the range since I was 16. Worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, did some scouting for the Army for a spell, tried my hand at mining during the gold rush but found I preferred the company of horses to that of desperate men. And now," she prompted when he fell silent. "Now I work for the Campbell outfit about 20 miles north of here, running their horse breeding program, breaking the young stock, that sort of thing." He hesitated, then added, "I've put aside a fair bit over the years. Been thinking about getting a place of my own soon." Amelia nodded, absorbing this information. "No family?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. "Forgive me, that's none of my business." "No need for forgiveness, madam. It's a fair question." Zachary's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested old pain. Had parents once, like everyone else. Father died in the war, mother remarried a man who had no use for another man's son. Left home at 14, been making my own way since. The simple recitation of facts told her more about his character than a dozen lengthy explanations might have. A boy forced to become a man too soon, who had nevertheless forged a life of honor and hard work. "And you, Mrs. Wright?" he asked, turning the conversation back to her. "What will you do now?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Amelia looked around at the half-finished cabin, the land that had been meant to support a family, a future. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Part of me thinks I should return to Boston, to the safety of what I know. My parents would welcome me back, especially now that they've been proven right about the dangers of the frontier." "And the other part?" Zachary prompted gently. Amelia met his gaze directly. "The other part feels that leaving would mean Samuel died for nothing, that all his dreams, all our dreams, would die with him." She gestured at the surrounding land. "But how could I possibly manage this alone? I know nothing of ranching or farming or building." "You could learn," Zachary suggested, his tone careful, neutral. "Or you could sell this place and start something more manageable in town. You're educated, aren't you? Perhaps teaching." Amelia nodded slowly. "I taught for a year before Samuel and I were married. The children of Boston merchants and bankers, mostly." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. "Very different from the children here, I imagine. Redemption Creek School could use a proper teacher," Zachary noted. "Current arrangement is just the preacher's wife teaching basics when she has time." The idea settled in Amelia's mind, taking root alongside the grief that still dominated her thoughts. Teaching again, creating something useful from the wreckage of her plans. It held a certain appeal. "I need time," she said finally, "to think, to decide." "Of course," Zachary agreed immediately. "There's no rush, Mrs. Wright. Winter's still a ways off and your boarding house situation is secure for now, isn't it? Yes, Mrs. Holloway has been very kind. She's reduced my rent in exchange for help with the cooking and cleaning. They finished their meal in contemplative silence, and as they prepared to leave, Amelia took one last look at the cabin, seeing it with new eyes not just as a monument to lost dreams, but as a possibility, a resource, a choice yet to be made. The ride back to town was easier somehow, as if having faced the physical reality of her situation had lightened some invisible burden. Zachary rode beside her, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or sharing bits of local knowledge, but mostly respecting her need for quiet contemplation. As they approached the outskirts of Redemption Creek, Amelia turned to him. "Thank you, Mr. Granger, for today and for keeping your promise to Samuel. It means more than I can express." Zachary tipped his hat slightly, a gesture that was becoming familiar. "It's nothing you need to thank me for, Mrs. Wright. I'll be around for a while yet if you need further assistance with anything." "Will you come by tomorrow?" The question surprised even Amelia herself, but once spoken, she found she meant it. "Perhaps we could discuss the teaching possibility further." A smile, the first real one she'd seen from him, transformed Zachary's weathered face, reaching all the way to his eyes. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Wright. Shall we say mid-morning?" "Mid-morning would be perfect," she agreed, feeling a small flutter of something in her chest. Not happiness exactly, grief still held too tight a grip for that, but perhaps a hint of possibility. At the boarding house, he helped her down from the mare with the same careful respect he'd shown all day, his hands strong but gentle at her waist. This time, though, their eyes met as her feet touched the ground, and for a moment neither moved. "Until tomorrow, then," Amelia said softly, breaking the strange tension that had sprung up between them. "Until tomorrow," Zachary echoed, releasing her and stepping back. As she watched him lead both horses back toward the livery stable, Amelia felt the first stirring of a new emotion beneath the heavy blanket of her grief. Not joy, not yet, but perhaps the distant cousin of hope. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with the first real hint of autumn in the air. Amelia woke early, having slept better than she had since Samuel's death. The crushing weight of grief still pressed against her chest, but it seemed somehow more manageable in the light of day, with practical matters to attend to and decisions to be made. She dressed with care in a simple blue dress that Samuel had always admired, pinning her dark hair in a neat arrangement at the nape of her neck. After helping Mrs. Holloway prepare breakfast for the other boarders, she found herself watching the clock, anticipating Zachary's arrival with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. When the knock came at precisely 10 o'clock, Amelia was seated in the small parlor, a book open but unread in her lap. Mrs. Holloway showed Zachary in, giving Amelia a meaningful look before discreetly withdrawing and closing the parlor door partway open enough for propriety, closed enough for some privacy. "Good morning, Mrs. Wright," Zachary said, hat in hand, looking unexpectedly polished. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His hair was freshly trimmed, his shirt clean and pressed, his boots polished to a shine. "Good morning, Mr. Granger," Amelia replied, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "Please sit down." He did so, perching somewhat uncomfortably on the delicate chair that seemed too small for his frame. "I've been thinking about your teaching idea," he said without preamble. "Spoke to Reverend Miller this morning. His wife is indeed overwhelmed with trying to manage the school along with her other duties, and they'd welcome a trained teacher taking over." Amelia felt a surge of something like excitement at the news. "Truly, they'd consider me." "More than consider, they'd be grateful," Zachary assured her. Town's growing, more families arriving every month. There's talk of building a proper schoolhouse come spring, but for now classes are held in the church. And the salary, Amelia asked practically. Would it be enough to live on? It's modest, Zachary admitted. But with your boarding house arrangement and perhaps some additional tutoring for the older children or adults wanting to improve their reading and figuring, you could manage comfortably enough. Amelia nodded, turning the idea over in her mind. Teaching again would give her purpose, a reason to rise each morning, a way to contribute to this community that had shown her kindness in her darkest hours. What about the property? She asked. Samuel's land. Our land. Zachary leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. You have options there. You could sell outright, as we discussed, or you could keep it, perhaps lease the grazing rights to one of the nearby ranches. The cabin. He hesitated. Well, it needs finishing before winter if it's to withstand the snow and cold. I can't do that work myself, Amelia said, facing the reality of her situation. No, Zachary agreed, but you could hire it done. Or, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I could help. In my spare time. Not as charity, he added quickly, seeing something flash in her eyes. You could pay me when you're able, or we could work out some other arrangement. The offer hung between them, fraught with implications. A single woman accepting such help from a man not related to her would raise eyebrows in Redemption Creek, despite the innocence of the arrangement. That's very kind, Mr. Granger, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time, nor create gossip that might damage either of our reputations. Zachary nodded, accepting her concerns without argument. A fair point, Mrs. Wright. Perhaps there's a middle path. I could organize a work party. Folks around here are good about helping neighbors in need, especially a widow. We could get the roof finished and the windows installed in a day with enough hands. The suggestion eased some of the tension from Amelia's shoulders. That sounds like a sensible compromise. And it would give me time to decide whether to sell or keep the property. Exactly, Zachary agreed, seeming pleased that she saw the wisdom in the plan. No need to make all your decisions at once. Grief needs its own time. His understanding touched something in Amelia, a chord of recognition. You speak as though you're familiar with loss, Mr. Granger. A shadow crossed his face, brief but unmistakable. We all face it sooner or later out here, Mrs. Wright. The country's beautiful but unforgiving. There was clearly more to the story, but Amelia didn't press. Instead, she steered the conversation back to practical matters. When do you think the Reverend would want me to start teaching? Right away, if you're willing. Term's already begun, but the children haven't progressed far. There's about 15 of them, ages 6 to 14, varying levels of previous education. Amelia felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. I could start next week, I suppose. I'd need to prepare lessons, assess what books and materials are available. I'll let Reverend Miller know, Zachary said, rising from his chair. He'll be mighty pleased, and I'll start organizing that work party for your cabin if that meets with your approval. It does, Amelia confirmed, standing as well. Thank you, Mr. Granger, for all of this. He looked at her then, really looked at her, his blue-gray eyes seeming to see past the brave face she was presenting to the world. You're stronger than you know, Mrs. Wright. Samuel saw that in you. It's why he loved this land. It requires strength, but it rewards it too. The words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket against the chill of grief. I'm trying to believe that, she said softly. Belief will come, he assured her, with time and small steps forward. He hesitated, then added, would you permit me to call on you again? Perhaps Sunday after church. We could ride out to the property again, make a list of what needs doing before winter. The request was properly phrased, respectful, but Amelia knew that accepting would signal something to the town that she was open to male company, however proper and practical the reason. Still, she found herself nodding. "Sunday would be fine, Mr. Granger. Thank you." As he took his leave, tipping his hat with that now familiar gesture, Amelia felt something shift inside her, not an ending to her grief, which she knew would be a long companion, but perhaps the beginning of a path that led through it rather than around it. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, as Amelia threw herself into preparations for teaching. Reverend Miller and his wife welcomed her with obvious relief, showing her the modest collection of books and slates available for the children's use, introducing her to the school board, consisting of the town doctor, the bank manager, and a prosperous rancher, and giving her freedom to organize the curriculum as she saw fit. The work was a blessing, occupying her mind during the day and leaving her tired enough at night that sleep came more easily. The nightmares Samuel's face, the sound of gunshots, the terrible moment when the sheriff had come to tell her the news still came, but less frequently, less vividly. On Sunday, she attended church services, sitting quietly in a back pew, accepting the sympathetic nods and gentle greetings of the townspeople with as much grace as she could muster. She noticed Zachary seated across the aisle, his tall frame unmistakable even among the other ranchers and cowboys who had come in from outlying properties for the service. He caught her eye once and inclined his head slightly in greeting, a gesture she returned with a small smile. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the crisp autumn sunshine, Zachary made his way to her side. "Mrs. Wright," he said, hat in hand, "you're looking well today." "Thank you, Mr. Granger," she replied, aware of the curious glances from those around them. "I understand I have you to thank for my new position. Reverend Miller speaks very highly of you." A touch of color appeared high on Zachary's weathered cheeks. "I only mentioned what was already known, that you're a trained teacher and the school is in need." The rest was their good sense in recognizing an opportunity. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of several townspeople, each expressing pleasure at the news of Amelia taking over the school. She responded graciously, though the effort of maintaining a social facade when grief still clawed at her insides was exhausting. Zachary seemed to sense her fatigue. "Perhaps we should postpone our ride today, Mrs. Wright," he suggested quietly when they had a moment alone. "You seem tired." Amelia considered the offer, tempted to retreat to the solitude of her room at the boarding house. But the thought of another afternoon alone with her memories was suddenly unbearable. "No," she said firmly. "I'd like to go. The fresh air will do me good." And so, an hour later, they were again riding side by side along the trail to her property, the autumn sun warm on their backs despite the crispness in the air. Amelia felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders as they left the town behind, the open landscape a balm to her spirit. "Tell me about the children I'll be teaching," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "You seem to know everyone in the area." Zachary chuckled, a warm sound that she realized she hadn't heard from him before. "Not everyone, but a fair few," he acknowledged. "The school children are a mixed bunch. Ranchers' kids, shopkeepers' young ones, a few from the mining families up in the hills. The Cooper twins are sharp as tacks but full of mischief. The Sullivan girl has a real gift for figures. Young Billy Matthews would rather be riding than reading, but his father's determined he'll have an education." Amelia listened, grateful for the insights that would help her prepare for her first day of teaching. "And the parents, what are their expectations?" "Practical learning, mostly. Reading, writing, arithmetic, some history and geography. They want their children to have better opportunities than they had, but they also need them to be able to contribute to the family work when not in school. It was a familiar dynamic, not so different from what she had encountered in her brief teaching experience back east, though the specifics of frontier life would require some adaptation in her approach. As they crested the final rise and her property came into view, Amelia felt a curious mixture of emotions, grief still, yes, but also a stirring of something like ownership, a connection to this land that Samuel had loved so dearly. The cabin stood as they had left it days before, but something was different. As they drew closer, Amelia realized what it was. A stack of lumber had appeared beside the unfinished structure, along with a pile of neatly arranged shingles for the roof. "Mr. Granger?" she questioned, turning to her companion. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I took the liberty of ordering some materials," he explained, "from the list we made. Put it on my account at the mercantile for now." "But," Amelia began, torn between gratitude and concern about being beholden to him. "It's just a loan," Zachary said quickly, reading her expression. "You can pay me back when you're able, or not at all if you decide to sell. But either way, the cabin needs finishing before the snow flies, and materials are getting scarce with winter approaching." His practical explanation made sense, but Amelia still felt a flutter of unease at being so indebted to a man she barely knew. "That's very foresighted of you, Mr. Granger. I'll repay you, of course," he nodded, accepting her declaration without argument. "I've spoken to some of the men from church about that work party we discussed. Next Saturday, if that suits you. The Campbell outfit has given me the day off, and between the ranch hands and the townsmen, we should have enough muscle to get the major work done." Amelia felt a rush of gratitude at his thoughtfulness, his quiet efficiency in helping her navigate this unexpected chapter of her life. "That would be wonderful. I'll arrange to provide food for the workers. Mrs. Holloway has already volunteered to organize the womenfolk for that," Zachary said with a small smile. "News travels fast in Redemption Creek." Of course it did, Amelia thought with a mixture of amusement and resignation. No doubt her situation and Zachary's involvement in it was already the subject of considerable speculation. They spent the next hour walking the property, making more detailed plans for what needed to be completed before winter, regardless of whether she ultimately decided to live there or sell. The stable needed reinforcing, the well required a proper cover, the cabin needed its roof completed and windows installed, and the interior needed a proper stove and chimney. As they worked, Amelia found herself watching Zachary surreptitiously, noting the confident way he moved, the competence in his hands as he examined the structures and made notes, the thoughtful consideration he gave to each of her questions. He was a man comfortable in his own skin, she realized, neither boastful nor falsely modest about his abilities. "You've been very kind, Mr. Granger," she said as they prepared to leave, the afternoon sun beginning its descent toward the western mountains. "I don't know how I would have managed all this without your guidance." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "It's no kindness, Mrs. Wright. It's simply the right thing to do. Out here we look after each other. It's how we survive." "Still," she insisted, "not everyone would have taken such an interest in a widow's welfare. Some might have seen opportunity rather than obligation." A shadow crossed his face. "There are such men," he acknowledged, "but they'd have me to answer to if they troubled you." The declaration was made matter-of-factly, without bravado, but Amelia had no doubt he meant every word. The realization that she had such a protector, one who asked nothing in return, who kept a respectful distance even as he offered support, warmed her in a way she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to find more adequate words. He nodded, the matter settled between them, As they mounted their horses for the return journey, Amelia found herself looking back at the half-finished cabin with new eyes, not just as a monument to what might have been with Samuel, but as a possibility for what might yet be. The ride back to town was companionable, with Zachary pointing out features of the landscape and sharing stories of the area's history. As they approached the outskirts of Redemption Creek, Amelia realized with a start that she had gone nearly 2 hours without actively thinking of her grief, not that it was gone, but that it had receded temporarily, allowing other thoughts and feelings to exist alongside it. At the boarding house, Zachary helped her down from her horse with the same careful respect he always showed. "I'll come by Wednesday evening, if that's agreeable," he said, "to update you on the work party arrangements." "That would be fine," Amelia agreed. "Perhaps you could stay for supper. Mrs. Holloway always prepares more than enough, and I know she'd welcome your company." The invitation was proper enough with the landlady present as chaperone, but Amelia still felt a flutter of uncertainty about extending it. Zachary's face brightened at the suggestion, however, easing her concern. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Wright. Thank you." As she watched him ride away, leading her borrowed horse back to the livery stable, Amelia felt the strangest sensation, a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced since before Samuel's death. Not happiness, not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward believing that happiness might someday be possible again. The following day, Amelia began her duties as the teacher of Redemption Creek's small school. The children, 14 in all ranging from 6 to 14 years of age, watched her with varying degrees of curiosity, wariness, and sympathy as she introduced herself. "Good morning, children," she began, her voice steadier than she had expected. "I am Mrs. Wright, and I will be your teacher from now on. Mrs. Miller has taught you well, and I hope to continue building on the foundation she has laid." A small girl in the front row, no more than 7, with blonde braids and serious eyes, raised her hand immediately. "Are you the lady whose husband got shot?" she asked bluntly. A horrified silence fell over the classroom. Amelia felt the familiar stab of grief, but also a surprising urge to smile at the child's directness. "Yes," she answered simply. "My husband died recently. That's why I've come to teach you, to make myself useful to this community that has been kind to me." The honesty of her response seemed to satisfy the children, and the awkward moment passed as Amelia moved on to assessing their current knowledge and organizing them into groups based on their abilities. By midday, she had established a routine and begun to learn their names and personalities. Zachary's descriptions had been accurate. The Cooper twins were indeed bright but mischievous. The Sullivan girl had a remarkable head for mathematics, and young Billy Matthews clearly longed to be outdoors rather than trapped behind a desk. But there were others. He hadn't mentioned quiet Mary Lawrence with her careful handwriting and thoughtful questions, sturdy James Pemberton, who struggled with reading but showed a natural understanding of practical mechanics, tiny Elizabeth Foster, who spoke barely above a whisper but whose eyes missed nothing. Teaching them absorbed Amelia completely, leaving no room for dwelling on her own troubles. By the end of that first day, she was exhausted but more at peace than she had been since Samuel's death. She had a purpose again, a reason to rise each morning, a contribution to make. The week passed in a blur of lesson plans, spelling tests, and getting to know her pupils. Word of her competence spread quickly through the small community, and by Friday, 3 more children had been enrolled in the school, their parents expressing gratitude for a proper educated lady teaching their offspring. Wednesday evening brought Zachary to the boarding house as planned. bearing news of the work party arrangements and a small bouquet of late wildflowers that he presented somewhat awkwardly to Mrs. Holloway, as thanks for including him in the evening meal. The landlady was clearly charmed, casting approving glances between him and Amelia throughout the supper. "Mr. Granger tells me you're making quite an impression at the school, Mrs. Wright," Mrs. Holloway remarked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. The Parker boy apparently came home talking of nothing but his new teacher's explanation of the solar system. Amelia felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "The children are eager to learn," she said modestly. "It makes teaching them a joy rather than a task." "A natural gift," Zachary commented quietly. "Not everyone can command the attention of young minds so effectively." The conversation flowed easily among the three of them, touching on town news, the upcoming harvest festival, and plans for the winter months. When Zachary finally took his leave, promising to arrive early on Saturday with the first of the work party volunteers, Amelia found herself reluctant to see him go. "He's a good man," Mrs. Holloway observed as they washed the supper dishes together after he'd gone. "Respected by everyone in these parts." "Yes," Amelia agreed neutrally, unwilling to encourage the obvious matchmaking gleam in the older woman's eye. "I'm grateful for his assistance." Mrs. Holloway gave her a knowing look but didn't press the matter. "It's been a month now since your Samuel passed," she said instead, her tone gentle. "How are you faring, truly?" The question caught Amelia off guard. Had it really been a month? The days immediately after Samuel's death were a blur of pain and shock, but these recent days had taken on a rhythm, a purpose. "I still miss him," she said honestly. "I still wake sometimes expecting to find him beside me, but—" She hesitated, feeling almost guilty at the admission. "But I'm finding reasons to go on. The children, the cabin, making a place for myself here." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "That's as it should be. Grief doesn't end, my dear, but it changes, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you." She patted Amelia's hand with soap-dampened fingers. "Samuel would be proud of how you're managing." The simple words brought tears to Amelia's eyes, but they were different from the desperate tears she had shed at the graveside cleaner somehow, acknowledging loss without being consumed by it. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing the landlady's hand in return. Saturday dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for outdoor work. Amelia rose early, helping Mrs. Holloway prepare food for the work party before changing into her plainest dress and sturdiest boots for the day ahead. She was just pinning her hair into a practical knot when she heard the first wagons arriving outside. From the boarding house window, she watched as Zachary directed the unloading of tools and additional materials. His tall figure easily recognizable among the dozen or so men who had gathered to help. There was something compelling about seeing him in this element, confident, capable, respected by the men around him despite being younger than many of them. When she joined them outside, ready to ride out to the property, Zachary approached with a smile that reached his eyes. "Mrs. Wright," he greeted her. "Looks like we've got a good turnout. Should have that roof finished and the windows in before sundown." "I can't thank you all enough," Amelia said, looking around at the assembled men, some she recognized from church. Others clearly ranch hands from outlying properties, all of them giving up their precious day of rest to help a widow in need. "No need for thanks," said a gruff older man she recognized as Mr. Peterson, the blacksmith. "Your husband was well liked in these parts. Just returning the favor, he helped plenty of folks himself." The simple tribute to Samuel brought a lump to Amelia's throat. "Still, I'm grateful," she managed. The journey to the property was a lively procession, with wagons loaded with supplies and additional men joining along the way. By the time they reached the cabin, the work party had swelled to nearly 20 strong, with several women from town arriving as well, led by Mrs. Holloway to organize the midday meal. Amelia had expected to feel like an outsider, perhaps even a burden, but instead found herself seamlessly incorporated into the day's activities. The men tackled the heaviest work, finishing the roof, installing windows, reinforcing the stable, while she worked alongside the women to caulk gaps in the cabin walls with a mixture of mud and straw, prepare food, and organize smaller tasks. Throughout the day, she found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Zachary. He moved between groups of workers, offering guidance here, lending muscle there, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms as he worked. Once, he caught her watching and tipped his hat with a smile that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. By late afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. The cabin roof was complete, glass windows installed and secured, the door properly hung on sturdy hinges. Inside, a simple stove had been positioned and connected to a newly built chimney. The stable had been reinforced, and a proper cover constructed for the well. As the workers gathered for a final meal before departing, the atmosphere was one of satisfied accomplishment and community spirit. Amelia found herself sitting beside Zachary on a fallen log, both of them tired but pleased with the day's progress. "I can't believe how much has been done," she said, looking around at her now weatherproof cabin and stable. "It would have taken weeks on my own if I could have managed it at all." "That's the way of things out here," Zachary replied, taking a sip of coffee from a tin cup. "Individually, we'd all struggle. Together, we thrive." Amelia nodded, understanding dawning about this frontier community in a way it hadn't before. "I see why Samuel loved it here," she said softly. "It's not just the land, beautiful as it is. It's the people, the way of life." Zachary studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "Does that mean you're considering staying? Beyond the winter, I mean." The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Amelia looked out at the land that stretched before them, 10 acres that had once represented a dream shared with Samuel, now transformed into what? A burden, an opportunity, a new beginning. "I think I might," she said finally. "Teaching gives me purpose in this place." She gestured at the cabin, the stable, the creek that marked the property's edge. "Samuel put so much of himself into it. I'm not ready to let it go." Zachary's smile was small but genuine. "I'm glad to hear it, Mrs. Wright. Redemption Creek would be poorer without you." As the sun began to set, and the workers loaded tools and remaining supplies to return to town, Amelia found herself reluctant to leave. The cabin, now secure against the elements, beckoned with possibilities. "I could stay here tonight," she mused aloud as Zachary helped her onto her borrowed horse. "There's a bedroll inside now and the stove." "Not yet," he said firmly. "There's still work to be done before it's properly habitable, ceiling around the windows, finishing the interior walls." "Another week or two, perhaps." Amelia nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his caution even as part of her longed to claim this space as her own immediately. "You'll help me with the remaining tasks?" she asked. "Of course," Zachary promised. "Whenever I can get away from the Campbell place. And there are others in town who would be glad to lend a hand as well." As they rode back to Redemption Creek with the last of the work party, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Amelia felt a curious sensation in her chest, a lightening, an opening, as if grief had loosened its grip just enough to allow something else to take root alongside it. Not happiness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. The following weeks fell into a pattern that brought unexpected comfort to Amelia's life. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, evenings to preparing lessons and helping at the boarding house. Saturdays often found her at the cabin with Zachary and occasionally other volunteers, working steadily on transforming it from a shell into a home. By late October, the interior walls had been finished with a mixture of plaster and whitewash, simple furniture installed, curtains hung at the windows. A proper bed replaced the bedroll, a colorful quilt donated by the ladies' sewing circle, adding warmth to the spare interior. Shelves held the few books Amelia had brought west, along with some cooking implements and dishes purchased from the general store. "It's becoming quite cozy," Zachary observed one Saturday afternoon as they stood in the doorway, surveying their work. The first snow of the season had fallen that morning, a light dusting that outlined the landscape in white and added urgency to their preparations. "Yes," Amelia agreed, a sense of accomplishment warming her despite the chill in the air. "I think I could move in next weekend if the weather holds." Zachary nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The stove draws well, and there's plenty of firewood stacked under the lean-to. You've got supplies enough to last a few weeks if a storm comes in." He hesitated, then added, "But it's a fair distance from town if you need help." "I've arranged with Mr. Jenkins at the livery to board one of the horses in town during the week, for getting to and from the school," Amelia explained. "And Mrs. Sullivan's oldest boy will ride out each evening to make sure all is well, in exchange for extra tutoring." Zachary seemed relieved at her forethought. "Sounds like you've considered everything. Still, winter in Montana can be unpredictable. If you ever feel unsafe here, promise you'll return to town until the weather improves." "I promise," Amelia said, touched by his concern. "I'm not foolhardy, Mr. Granger, just determined to make this work." He smiled at that, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that had become familiar and welcome over these weeks of shared labor. "Determined is a good word for you, Mrs. Wright." As they closed up the cabin for the day, preparing to return to town before the early winter dusk settled in, Amelia found herself reluctant to leave Zachary's company. Their time together had become a highlight of her week, his quiet strength and practical wisdom a balm to her still healing heart. "Will you come to the Harvest Festival next weekend?" she asked as they mounted their horses. "The children have prepared some recitations, and I promised I'd attend." "I wouldn't miss it," Zachary assured her. "The Campbell outfit gives everyone the day off for the festival. It's quite the occasion in these parts." The ride back to town was companionable, with conversation flowing easily between them. Amelia realized with a start of surprise that she no longer felt the need to guard her every expression, to maintain a facade of coping. With Zachary, she could simply be grieving still, yes, but also healing, growing, finding her way forward. At the boarding house, as had become their custom, Zachary helped her down from her horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. This time, though, they lingered a moment longer than necessary, their eyes meeting in the gathering dusk. "Thank you," Amelia said softly, "for everything." "No need for thanks between friends," Zachary replied, his voice equally quiet. "Friends. Yes, they had become that, hadn't they? Something more than acquaintances, bound by a deathbed promise, something that had grown naturally through shared work and purpose." As she watched him ride away, leading her borrowed horse back to the livery stable, Amelia acknowledged to herself what she had been avoiding for weeks, that her feelings for Zachary Granger had grown beyond simple gratitude or friendship. The realization brought with it a complex tangle of emotions: guilt at the idea of caring for another man so soon after Samuel's death, fear of being vulnerable again, uncertainty about what the future might hold. That night, alone in her room at the boarding house, Amelia took out the small daguerreotype of Samuel that she kept beside her bed. His smiling face looked back at her, frozen in time, unaware of the fate that awaited him. "What would you think, Samuel?" she whispered to the image. "Would you understand? Would you approve?" No answer came, of course, but as she traced his familiar features with a gentle finger, Amelia felt a sense of peace settle over her. Samuel had loved life, had embraced it with both arms. He wouldn't have wanted her to retreat from it, to spend her days in perpetual mourning. The Harvest Festival arrived the following Saturday, transforming the town square of Redemption Creek into a riot of autumn colors and activity. Tables laden with the bounty of local farms and ranches stood alongside displays of handicrafts. Children ran laughing between the stalls, couples strolled arm in arm, and the sound of fiddle music filled the crisp air. Amelia, dressed in her best blue dress with a matching ribbon in her hair, moved among her students and their families, accepting compliments on the children's progress and invitations to various homes for Sunday dinner. She found herself scanning the crowd repeatedly, looking for Zachary's tall figure, disappointed each time she failed to spot him. "He'll be here," came Mrs. Holloway's knowing voice at her elbow. The Campbell Ranch hands always ride in together, and they're known to make an entrance. Amelia felt her cheeks warm at having her thoughts so easily read. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. Mrs. Holloway just chuckled, patting her arm. "Of course not, dear. Now, come help me judge the pie contest before the school recitations begin." An hour later, as Amelia stood proudly watching her students perform their carefully rehearsed poems and songs on the makeshift stage in front of the church, she felt, rather than saw, Zachary's arrival. Turning slightly, she spotted him at the edge of the crowd, hat in hand, his expression warm as he watched the children. When their eyes met, he smiled and tipped his head in greeting, a gesture she returned before turning her attention back to the performance. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed to enjoy the various festival activities, Zachary made his way to her side. "Your students did you proud, Mrs. Wright," he said. "Especially young Billy Matthews. Never thought I'd see that boy stand still long enough to recite anything, let alone something as long as the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere." Amelia laughed, pleasure warming her at his observation. Billy needed the right motivation. "I promised him an afternoon of horsemanship lessons if he memorized the entire poem. His father has agreed to let you provide them, if you're willing." Zachary raised an eyebrow. "Making promises on my behalf, are you?" "Only ones I knew you wouldn't mind keeping," she replied, surprising herself with the teasing note in her voice. His answering smile was warm enough to chase away the autumn chill. "You know me well, it seems." The simple statement hung between them, weighted with meaning. Yes, she did know him now, his patience and steadiness, his quiet humor, his unwavering integrity. And he knew her, had seen her at her lowest point and watched her find her way back to living. They spent the afternoon moving through the festival together, stopping to admire craftwork, sample treats from the food stalls, and chat with townspeople who no longer looked at Amelia with pity, but with acceptance, as one of their own. If anyone raised eyebrows at their companionship, Amelia didn't notice or care. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit around the square and the fiddle band struck up livelier tunes for dancing. Couples formed sets for a Virginia reel, with much laughter and good-natured shouting of instructions. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Wright?" Zachary asked, offering his hand. Amelia hesitated only briefly. Dancing seemed a step beyond their usual interactions, a public declaration of sorts. But the music was irresistible, the atmosphere joyful, and Zachary's eyes held a question that went beyond the simple invitation to join the reel. "I would," she said, placing her hand in his. His palm was warm against hers as he led her to join the set. The dance brought them together and apart, joining hands and circling, moving down the line and back again. Zachary moved with surprising grace for such a tall man, and Amelia found herself laughing freely for the first time in months as they twirled and stepped in time to the music. When the dance ended, they were both breathless, standing closer than propriety strictly allowed. Around them, couples were forming for the next dance, but Zachary didn't release her hand. "Would you walk with me a moment?" he asked quietly. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Intrigued and a little nervous, Amelia nodded. They moved away from the dancers toward the edge of the square, where the light from the lanterns didn't quite reach, and the music was muted enough for conversation. "I've been thinking," Zachary began, his expression serious in the dim light, "about your cabin and winter coming on," not what Amelia had expected him to say. "Yes," she prompted when he hesitated. "It's not right, you being out there alone, so far from help if needed." He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "I'd like to build a small cabin on the edge of your property, close enough to provide assistance if required, far enough for propriety." Amelia blinked in surprise. "You want to live on my land, not permanently," he hastened to explain. "Just through the winter. I've spoken to Mr. Campbell, and he's agreed to let me continue managing the horse program while living off the ranch, as long as I'm there for the main working hours." The proposal was practical, thoughtful like everything Zachary did. But Amelia sensed there was more to it than simple concern for her safety. "And after winter?" she asked, watching his face carefully. Zachary met her gaze directly. "After winter, we could reassess. Perhaps by then you'll have decided to sell and return east. Or perhaps—" He trailed off, leaving the alternative unspoken between them. Amelia understood then what he was offering: protection without pressure, proximity without presumption, time to heal without being truly alone, and perhaps, if she was ready, the chance for something more to grow between them. "People will talk," she said, not as an objection but as a simple statement of fact. "People always talk," Zachary replied with a slight smile. "But they'll be less likely to talk badly if I'm in a separate dwelling, respectful of your position and reputation." Amelia considered the proposal, weighing practicality against propriety, safety against independence. "It would ease my mind to have help nearby," she admitted, "especially with the horses and heavier tasks." Relief flickered across Zachary's features. "Then you'll agree?" "Yes," Amelia said, making the decision firmly. "But I insist on paying you rent for the use of my land." Zachary laughed, the sound warm in the cool evening air. "Always practical, Mrs. Wright. Very well, we'll work out a fair arrangement." As they returned to the festival, rejoining the celebration with a new understanding between them, Amelia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Samuel would approve, she thought. He had always valued practicality, community, and moving forward. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as Amelia moved into her cabin, and Zachary, with help from some of the Campbell Ranch hands, constructed a simple one-room structure about 100 yards from her own dwelling. Close enough to see smoke from each other's chimneys, far enough for propriety and privacy. Winter descended in earnest just as both dwellings were completed, a heavy snowfall blanketing the landscape in white. The school term continued, with Amelia riding daily between her cabin and town, sometimes having to break trail through fresh snow. On the worst days, she stayed at the boarding house, but more often she returned to her own home, finding comfort in the simple routines of maintaining a household. Zachary's presence nearby was a constant reassurance. He checked on her each morning before riding to the Campbell Ranch and again each evening upon his return. Their conversations, once centered entirely on practical matters, gradually expanded to include their pasts, their hopes, their views on everything from politics to literature. "You surprise me, Mr. Granger," Amelia remarked one evening as they sat beside her cabin fireplace, cups of coffee warming their hands after a particularly cold day. "I wouldn't have taken you for a reader of Emerson." Zachary smiled, the firelight playing across his features. "There's plenty of time for reading during the long winter evenings in a lined shack, Mrs. Wright. And a man picks up interesting books here and there in his travels." These quiet evenings became a highlight of Amelia's week. Zachary stopping by after supper, ostensibly to check on her woodpile or water supply, but lingering to talk, sometimes read aloud, occasionally just sit in companionable silence as the winter wind howled outside. Christmas approached, bringing with it school festivities and community gatherings despite the harsh weather. Amelia threw herself into preparations, helping her students create simple gifts for their parents, decorating the church with evergreen boughs, baking cookies from precious stores of sugar and butter. On Christmas Eve, after the church service and community supper, Zachary escorted her home through the deep snow, the night sky brilliant with stars above them. At her cabin door he hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "A Christmas gift, if you'll accept it." Amelia was touched and a little flustered. "I have something for you as well," she admitted, opening her door and gesturing him inside out of the biting cold. By the light of the fire, they exchanged their gifts, Zachary presenting her with a small, carefully wrapped package, Amelia handing him a parcel of similar size. By unspoken agreement, they opened them simultaneously. Amelia's gift to Zachary was a book, a collection of Walt Whitman's poetry that she had ordered specially from Denver, remembering his mention of admiring the poet's work. His face lit up as he recognized the volume, fingers tracing the embossed title with obvious pleasure. "This is truly thoughtful, Mrs. Wright," he said warmly. "I'll treasure it." Amelia's own gift, when unwrapped, proved to be a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. Opening it, she found inside a delicate silver locket. "It's beautiful," she breathed, lifting the piece carefully. "Open it," Zachary urged quietly. Inside, she found 2 miniature portraits, one of Samuel, clearly copied from her daguerreotype, and one of herself, somehow captured without her knowledge. "How did you?" she began, voice catching with emotion. "Mrs. Holloway let me borrow your daguerreotype briefly," Zachary explained. "And as for yours, I confess I had it done from memory with some help from a traveling artist who passed through town last month." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift, acknowledging her past, her love for Samuel, while also marking this new chapter in her life. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's perfect." Zachary hesitated, then reached out to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "I don't want to replace him in your heart, Amelia," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I just hope with time there might be room there for someone else as well." The simple declaration, honest and without pressure, broke something open inside her, a door she had kept firmly closed since Samuel's death, afraid of betraying his memory, afraid of being vulnerable to such pain again. "There already is," she admitted softly, meeting his gaze directly. "Room in my heart. For you." The confession hung between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Zachary's expression softened, his eyes warming with an emotion Amelia had seen growing there over these months but had never acknowledged until now. "May I call on you properly, then?" he asked formally. "Not just as a friend or neighbor, but with intentions that, I hope, might eventually lead to something more." Amelia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Zachary reached for her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both old-fashioned and deeply touching. "Merry Christmas, Amelia," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Zachary," she replied, his name feeling both strange and right on her lips. He left soon after, returning to his own cabin through the starlit night, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily through the autumn and early winter, a promise of possibilities to come. As Amelia prepared for bed that night, she found herself touching the locket around her neck, thinking of the two portraits it contained, her past and her present, grief and hope, ending and beginning. For the first time since Samuel's death, she fell asleep with a sense of anticipation rather than dread for what the future might hold. The winter months passed in a rhythm of work, weather, and gradually deepening connection. Zachary called on Amelia formally now, taking her to church socials, escorting her to the occasional town gathering when weather permitted travel, joining her for Sunday dinners prepared in her cabin. Their courtship was conducted with proper respect for her widow status and the watchful eyes of the community, but there was no mistaking the growing attachment between them. Mrs. Holloway, upon learning of the official change in their relationship, had merely smiled knowingly and remarked that it was about time. By late February, when the worst of winter's grip had begun to loosen but spring was still a distant promise, Zachary and Amelia had settled into a comfortable pattern. He continued to work at the Campbell Ranch during the day while she taught at the school, but evenings and weekends were increasingly spent together, planning improvements to her property, discussing books, or simply enjoying each other's company. It was during one such evening, as they sat before the fire in Amelia's cabin after sharing a simple meal, that Zachary broached a subject they had both been circling for weeks. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, his expression serious in the flickering firelight. "About what happens when spring comes." Amelia nodded, setting aside her mending. "As have I. My arrangement with the Campbell outfit was only ever temporary," Zachary continued, "a stepping stone while I saved for my own place." He hesitated, then pressed on. "I've nearly got enough now for a decent start, not a big spread, but enough to build on." "That's wonderful," Amelia said sincerely, though her heart gave an uncomfortable lurch at the thought of him leaving. "You'll make an excellent rancher on your own account." Zachary leaned forward, his gaze intent. "The thing is, Amelia, I don't want to start over somewhere else, not anymore." He took a deep breath. "What I hope for is to build something here, with you." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" He nodded, reaching for her hand. "I love you, Amelia Wright. I think I have since that first day at the cemetery, though it took me time to recognize it and even longer to believe I had the right to feel it." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife when the proper mourning period has passed. If you might consider joining your land with what I can purchase adjacent, creating something together that neither of us could manage alone." The proposal, practical and romantic in equal measure, brought tears to Amelia's eyes. She had known this conversation was coming, had hoped for it. Even but facing it directly still awakened a tumult of emotions. "I love Samuel still," she said quietly, needing to acknowledge this truth between them. "I know," Zachary replied without hesitation. "I would never ask you not to. He'll always be part of who you are, part of what brought you here." His understanding, his acceptance of her past as integral to her present, was what finally broke down the last of Amelia's reservations. "And I love you, Zachary Granger," she said, her voice stronger now. "Not instead of Samuel, but in addition to him. Differently, but no less truly." Relief and joy spread across Zachary's features. "Then you'll marry me, when the time is right." "Yes," Amelia said simply. "I will." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers with a reverence that made her heart swell. They sat together in the firelight, hands entwined, discussing practical plans for their future, expanding the cabin, acquiring adjacent land, combining their resources and dreams. Later, as Zachary prepared to leave for his own cabin, he paused at the door. "I've been meaning to tell you something," he said, his expression thoughtful. "About that promise I made to Samuel." Amelia tilted her head questioningly. "What about it?" "He didn't actually ask me to look after you," Zachary admitted. "Not in so many words, at least. He was barely conscious when we found him, could only manage a few words." "Then what did he say?" Amelia asked, confused. Zachary's expression softened with memory. "He said your name, just Amelia. And then he looked at me with such concern, such love for you in his eyes, that I knew what he was asking without him having to say it." The revelation brought fresh tears to Amelia's eyes, but they were gentle tears, healing tears. "That sounds like Samuel," she whispered. "Saying everything without words," Zachary nodded. "I hope you don't mind that I elaborated a bit that first day. You needed a reason to accept help, and I needed a reason to offer it that wouldn't seem presumptuous." "I don't mind," Amelia assured him, stepping closer. "However it began, I'm grateful for where it's led us." Their eyes met in the dim light of the cabin, and by mutual, unspoken agreement, Zachary bent to press a gentle kiss to her lips there first, tender and brief but full of promise. "Good night, Amelia," he said softly, stepping back reluctantly. "Good night, Zachary," she replied, watching as he made his way through the moonlit snow toward his own cabin, his figure tall and straight against the starry sky. As she closed the door against the cold night air, Amelia touched her lips, still feeling the gentle pressure of his kiss. Samuel would understand, she thought. He of all people had believed in embracing life fully, in finding joy where it was offered. And Zachary's steady, honorable Zachary was a joy she had never expected to find in the aftermath of such loss. Spring arrived in fits and starts, with warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, but by early April the land was awakening in earnest. The creek that bordered Amelia's property ran high with snowmelt, new grass pushed through the muddy earth, and the first wildflowers dotted the hillsides. With the change in seasons came a shift in Amelia and Zachary's plans. The adjacent property they had hoped to purchase was unexpectedly offered at a favorable price when its owner decided to return east. With their combined savings, they were able to secure it, doubling the size of what would become their ranch. Work began immediately on expanding the cabin, adding a proper kitchen, a second bedroom for future children, a covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the structure. Zachary moved his few possessions into the main cabin, converting his small dwelling into a bunkhouse for the two ranch hands they hoped to hire by summer. The school term ended in late May, with a celebration that drew most of the community. Amelia's students presented recitations and songs, displayed their improved penmanship and arithmetic skills, and generally made their teacher proud. When Reverend Miller announced that Mrs. Wright had agreed to return for another term in the fall, the news was met with genuine approval from parents and children alike. What the Reverend didn't announce, though it was by now common knowledge in the small community, was that by the time school resumed, Mrs. Wright would have a new name. The wedding was set for mid-June, a year and 3 months after Samuel's death. Long enough to honor his memory properly, but not so long as to deny the new life that was waiting to be embraced. The night before the wedding, Amelia stood alone by Samuel's grave in the small cemetery on the edge of town. The headstone, installed some months after his burial, was simple but dignified, bearing his name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved husband, dreamer of dreams." "I'm getting married tomorrow, Samuel," she said softly, kneeling to place a small bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the stone. "To Zachary Granger, the man who took my hand that day when grief had me on my knees. The man who helped me find my way forward when I couldn't see a path." A gentle breeze stirred the grass around the grave, carrying the scent of pine and sage. "I want you to know that I still love you," Amelia continued, her voice steady despite the tears that blurred her vision. "I always will. But there's room in my heart for Zachary too, a different kind of love but no less real." She touched the locket that still hung around her neck, containing both their images. "He understands that you're part of me, part of what made me who I am. He honors that, honors you." She fell silent, listening to the evening sounds around her birdsong, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of leaves in the cemetery's lone cottonwood tree. "I think you would like him," she said finally, a small smile touching her lips. "He loves this land like you did, sees possibilities where others see only hardship. He's building something on the foundation you started, helping me create the life we dreamed of, though in a different way than we planned." Rising to her feet, Amelia brushed a hand across the top of the headstone in a gesture of farewell. "Thank you, Samuel, for loving me, for bringing me west, for teaching me to see beauty in unexpected places. I'm going to be happy, I promise. The kind of happy that honors what we had rather than diminishes it." As she turned to leave, she noticed a figure waiting respectfully at the cemetery gate. Zachary, hat in hand, his expression somber but understanding. He had given her this time alone without her having to ask for it, recognizing her need to make peace with her past before stepping fully into her future. Walking toward him, Amelia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was her path now, not one she had chosen or expected, but one that had opened before her when all other doors seemed closed. "Ready?" Zachary asked simply as she reached him. Amelia nodded, taking his offered arm. "Ready." The wedding the next day was a community celebration, with nearly everyone in Redemption Creek and the surrounding ranches in attendance. The church was decorated with wildflowers and evergreen boughs. The women had outdone themselves with a feast laid out in the churchyard, and even the weather cooperated, providing sunshine and a gentle breeze. Amelia wore a dress of pale blue silk that Mrs. Holloway had helped her sew, with her mother's lace collar carefully attached at the neckline. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant knot, adorned with a small spray of white blossoms. Around her neck, the silver locket caught the light as she moved. Zachary, standing tall and somewhat nervous at the altar in a new black suit, watched her approach with an expression of such tender wonder that murmurs of approval rippled through the congregation. This was right. The community had decided. The young widow and the honorable cowboy, building something new from shared loss and respect. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Miller speaking eloquently about new beginnings, second chances, and the blessings that could emerge from even the darkest chapters of life. When Zachary and Amelia exchanged their vows, their voices were clear and confident, carrying to the back of the packed church. "I, Zachary James Granger, take thee, Amelia Elizabeth Wright, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I, Amelia Elizabeth Wright, take thee, Zachary James Granger, to be my lawfully wedded husband." Simple words, spoken countless times by countless couples, yet holding within them a particular poignancy for these two who had found each other across the divide of grief and uncertainty. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, speeches and toasts. children running laughing between the tables, old men telling increasingly exaggerated stories as the hours passed. Amelia and Zachary moved among their friends and neighbors, accepting congratulations and well wishes, sharing their joy with the community that had supported them both. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they slipped away from the festivities, riding side by side toward their home, no longer his or hers, but theirs. The cabin, now expanded and improved, waited for them on the rise overlooking their combined property, smoke rising gently from the chimney where one of the ranch hands had lit a fire to welcome them home. Inside, candles had been lit, the bed made up with fresh linens, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses set out on the table, small touches arranged by Mrs. Holloway and the other women, their way of blessing this new beginning. "Welcome home, Mrs. Granger," Zachary said softly as they crossed the threshold. "Thank you, Mr. Granger," Amelia replied, her heart full as she took in the simple comfort of their shared space. Later, as moonlight spilled through the curtains and the sounds of the night settled around them, Amelia lay in her husband's arms, experiencing a contentment she had feared might never be hers again. Zachary's heartbeat was steady beneath her cheek, his breathing deep and even in sleep, his arm protective around her waist. They had spoken their private vows to each other in the darkness, promises more intimate than those exchanged before the congregation. Promises of patience and understanding, of respect for the past while building toward the future, of love that acknowledged imperfection but cherished anyway. Amelia thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the devastating grief at Samuel's graveside to the quiet joy of finding love again. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a new chapter, different but equally precious. Outside, an owl called into the night, answered by its mate from somewhere in the darkness. Inside, Amelia closed her eyes and allowed herself to dream of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that, seasons turning, children perhaps, a life built day by day with the man whose steady presence had shown her that grief was not the end of her story, merely a chapter in a book still being written. Epilogue. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the expanded ranch house, its warmth tempered by the breeze that always seemed to find its way through the valley. On the wide front porch, Amelia Granger sat in a rocking chair, a small girl of about 3 with dark curls and serious eyes on her lap, listening intently as her mother read from a well-worn copy of Little Women. From the corral beyond the barn came the sound of men's voices and the occasional whinny of horses. Zachary was working with the new yearlings, assisted by their 2 permanent ranch hands and their 4-year-old son, Samuel, who considered himself quite the horseman already despite his tender age. The ranch had prospered in the 5 years since their marriage, growing from the original combined properties to nearly 100 acres. The horse breeding program Zachary had managed for the Campbell outfit was now the core of their own operation, producing mounts known throughout the territory for their intelligence and stamina. Amelia had continued teaching for 2 more years after their wedding, only stopping when Samuel was born. Now she managed the household, kept the ranch accounts with meticulous care, and taught their children with the same dedication she had shown her students in town. Life wasn't always easy. The Montana Territory remained a challenging place to carve out a living, but it was good, full, rich with the kind of contentment that came from work well done, love freely given, challenges faced together. "Mama," little Rebecca interrupted, pointing toward the road that led to their property. "Someone's coming." Amelia looked up from the book to see a wagon approaching, driven by a familiar figure. "It's Mrs. Holloway," she told her daughter with a smile. "Remember." She's bringing us preserves from her summer berries." Rebecca nodded solemnly. At 3, everything was serious business. "And cookies?" she asked hopefully. "Probably cookies too," Amelia agreed, setting aside the book and rising from the rocker. "Shall we go tell Papa we have visitors?" Hand in hand, they walked down the porch steps and toward the corral, Rebecca skipping every few steps in her excitement. The sight of Zachary leaning on the fence, pointing out something about a young horse to their son, never failed to warm Amelia's heart. At 38, he was in his prime, confidence in every movement, laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, strength in his shoulders from years of honest work. "Papa," Rebecca called as they approached, "Mrs. Holloway is coming with cookies." Zachary turned, his face lighting up at the sight of his wife and daughter. "Is that so, little miss? Well, we'd better wash up then, hadn't we?" He swung the child up onto his shoulders, making her squeal with delight, then leaned down to press a kiss to Amelia's cheek. "You look beautiful today," he murmured, for her ears alone. Even after 5 years, such moments still brought a blush to Amelia's cheeks. "And you look like a man who's been working with horses all day," she teased, brushing dust from his shirt front. Their son scrambled through the fence rails to join them, his small face alight with the same excitement as his sister's. "Can I ride with Mr. Thompson to check the north pasture after Mrs. Holloway's visit, Papa? He said I could if you said yes." Zachary exchanged a glance with Amelia, a silent communication perfected over years of partnership. She nodded slightly, trusting his judgment about their son's readiness for such an adventure. "All right, Samuel," Zachary agreed, "but you listen to everything Mr. Thompson tells you, understand? And be back before supper." The boy nodded vigorously, already turning to run toward the house. "I'll get cleaned up," he called over his shoulder. As the family made their way back to the ranch house to greet their visitor, Amelia felt the familiar weight of the silver locket against her skin, beneath her dress. She still wore it daily, the twin portraits inside a reminder of how the past and present could coexist, how love could expand rather than diminish with time. Mrs. Holloway's wagon pulled up in front of the house just as they reached the porch. The older woman, now in her 70s but still spry, waved cheerfully as Zachary moved to help her down. "Brought you some of my raspberry preserves," she announced, gesturing to the covered baskets in the wagon bed. "And yes, Miss Rebecca, cookies for good children who remember their manners." Rebecca immediately dropped into a small curtsy that made the adults laugh, while Samuel dashed forward to peer into the baskets. As they all moved inside to escape the midday heat, Amelia paused for a moment on the porch, looking out over the land that had become so much a part of her. The cabin Samuel had started building was now incorporated into a larger structure, but his vision, their shared dream, remained at the heart of what she and Zachary had created together. In the small family cemetery on the hill behind the house, Samuel's reinterred remains lay beneath a shady oak tree. They had moved him from the town cemetery 3 years ago, wanting him close, part of the land he had loved. Zachary had been the one to suggest it, understanding without being told that Amelia needed this connection maintained, this acknowledgement of the foundations upon which their current happiness was built. "Everything all right?" Zachary's voice came from the doorway, gentle with understanding. Amelia turned to him with a smile that held all the complexities of their journey together. "Everything is perfect," she said, and meant it. Hand in hand, they went inside to join their children and their friend, moving forward into the future that had seemed impossible on that grief-stricken day when a widow had wept at her husband's grave, and a cowboy had taken her hand, promising she would not grieve alone. That promise, made in a moment of compassion, had grown into something neither could have imagined, a love story written not in spite of loss but through it. Each chapter adding depth and meaning to a narrative still unfolding with each passing day. As the laughter of their children filled the ranch house, Amelia caught Zachary's eye across the table and saw reflected there the same gratitude she felt for second chances, for unexpected joy, for the healing that came not from forgetting the past, but from honoring it while still embracing all that life continued to offer. It was, she thought, the greatest gift of all,